welcome to the ThinkForward conference series organized by SKEMA Business School. Professors Rodolphe Desbordes and Frédéric Meunier invite the best international experts to decipher our complex world and anticipate the future. Our prestigious guests are academics, journalists, and policymakers. They all share an uncanny ability to think out of the box.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zakaria Babutide, and I'm an associate professor of economics at SKEMA Business School. And it's my great pleasure to introduce today's ThinkForward speaker, Professor Gerd Gigerenzer. It's actually very hard to comprehensively describe the mark that Gerd has made on decision theory in domains of law, economics, finance, and in general in social sciences. However, I think I would not be making a mistake to say that first and foremost, Gerd is a psychologist, and a psychologist with an agenda in a positive sense of this word. His large body of work and service centers around helping decision makers make better decisions. And I really think that's a worthy cause. Professor Gigerenzer has received his PhD in psychology from University of Munich and has held professor positions in various universities in Germany, in Austria, and in the United States. Most notably, he was a professor at the University of Chicago. He was the director of Max Planck Institute for Psychological Research and the director of the Center for Adaptive Behavior and Cognition at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. Over the last 12 years, Gerd is the director of the Harding Center for Risk Literacy, which is housed at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development and more recently at the University of Potsdam. Over many years, Gerd has worked on separating risk from uncertainty and understanding what consequences this has for decision makers. He's perhaps most known for his work on heuristic decision-making, bounded rationality, and ecological rationality, which I know that he will be touching upon in today's speech. He's one of the most cited social scientists. Google Scholar puts his current citation level at 90,000, over 90,000. And he has received many awards for his academic work, perhaps the most notable being the Prize for Behavioral Science Research for American Association for Advancement of Science. However, Gerd is not an ivory tower academic. He has brought his expertise to real-world decision makers through his consulting and training work. Gerd has trained federal judges, medical doctors, and top managers in decision-making under risk and uncertainty. Gerd is also a prolific speaker and science communicator, which we are all excited about today. Unlike many other great thinkers, Gerd's agenda includes educating as many current or future decision makers as possible on the advantages of better informed decisions in the domains of law, finance, and healthcare. In fact, Gerd has also received the Communicator Award from the German Research Association, recognizing his impact in this area. So without further ado, I'd like to leave this virtual floor to Professor Gerd Gigerenzer, who will speak to us about heuristic decision-making today.
How to make good decisions. If you open a book in economics, behavioral economics, psychology or philosophy, you most likely encounter the following message. Good decisions follow the laws of logic, the calculus of probability, and the maximization of utility. This is a beautiful mathematical theory, but it doesn't describe how most of us make decisions most of the time. Not even how those who write the books make their own decisions, as the following story tells. A professor from Columbia University in New York had an offer from a rival university, that was Harvard, and he could not make up his mind. Should he stay or leave, accept or reject? A colleague took him aside and said, "What's your problem? Just maximize your expected utility and pick the option with the highest value. That's what you're writing all the time about. Exasperated, the professor responded, "Come on, this is serious." I would like to introduce you today into decision-making under uncertainty. That is, conditions for rationality that are postulated by the neoclassical economics when these conditions are not met, as Herbert Simon put it. So here is the key distinction of this talk. It's between risk and uncertainty. The distinction has been made by Frank Knight exactly 100 years ago, by John Maynard Keynes exactly 100 years ago in their dissertations, and by many others. But it has for the most of time been ignored by economic theory and also behavioral economics. Here it's a situation of risk is defined that you know all future states of the world, their consequences and probabilities. In that world, fine-tuned optimization policies work. That's the framework of Arrow de Breu, or in finance, Merton Markowitz. So the ideal example is lotteries or roulette. If you play the roulette, you know all future states of the world. It's numbers between 0 and 36, and all the consequences and probabilities. Nothing unexpected can happen. No 37. Situations of uncertainty are different. Here, that degree of certainty about knowledge about the full set of future states, the consequences, probabilities, is not available. They cannot all be foreseen. And it's not just about probabilities, which is where economic theory is still dealing with, namely ambiguities. It's about situations where you do not know what the future states is. It's not just 36 numbers. Other things can happen. For instance, Jimmy Savage, the founder of Bayesian decision theory, was very clear that his theory, Bayesian version of expected utility maximization, applies to risk. He called it small worlds, and does not apply beyond risk. Savage said it would be ridiculous to apply to situations such as planning a picnic, because unforeseen events can happen. We are now in a world where the expected utility maximization theories are applied to everything and not just to risk. And a consequence is that what is optimal under risk is not necessarily optimal under uncertainty. Unexpected things happen. In my opinion, we need to have the courage to extend both behavioral economics and economics to situations of uncertainty, not only ambiguity, but situations where you cannot know. For instance, the world of finance is typically a world of uncertainty. We live today in the world of COVID-19, and we have no idea how this will go on. That's uncertainty. Still, we have to act in these situations and do something, and people do it all the time. What are the tools for uncertainty? It is not optimization, because by definition you can't do it. It is robust heuristics. So I will now explain in this talk what is a heuristic, and give you first an example, then explain the key question, the study of ecological rationality. So when does a heuristic work and when does it not work? So to identify the conditions, and I'll give you a few examples, and I hope I'll inspire you, and maybe you will be sleepless this night, because much of what I'm saying conflicts with what you may have read. Okay, are you ready? So I take the example about heuristics from sports. Is there anyone among you who plays baseball? So, or cricket. So a ball is coming in high, and an experienced player knows where to run to catch the ball. How does the person know it? Now, here are two kinds of theories. One is a theory out of the world of optimization, and the other one is a heuristic theory. So first one, the idea would be now the player will calculate the trajectory of the ball consciously or unconsciously and run to the point where it comes down. Have you ever calculated a trajectory? Here is the formula. And the problem is not the calculation. The problem is the estimation of, say, alpha, which is the initial angle with which the ball has been thrown or kicked. And those of you who regularly calculate trajectories notice that I've lost out. I've left out wind, speed, and a number of other variables just to make it simple. So, do players, when they catch balls, so outfielders, when they catch fly balls, calculate trajectories? Studies show no. They use a number of simple heuristics. And I'll show you now the most simple one, which works when the fly ball is already up high in the air. It has 3 steps. The gaze heuristic takes the following steps. First, fix your gaze on the ball, start running, and then adjust your running speed so that the angle of gaze remains constant. I'll show you now a player who runs in a way so that the angle of gaze remains constant. Watch the angle. It's constant. What happens? The angle guides the player to the ball. Do you want to see it again? The important thing is this player can ignore all the variables in the equation, including those I've left out, and focus only on a single variable, which is the angle of gaze. This is an example from a larger class of heuristics that's called one reason heuristics. It only has identified a powerful reason and ignores everything else. It is also interesting because animals use the same heuristic in 3-dimensional space, like hawks when they hunt doves, or it has been, the technical term is accepted, so put into a new use from the one it was originally meant by evolution, by people. It is also a heuristic that has been discovered by the Royal Air Force at the beginning of World War II and used to guide fighter planes against German bombers. And while before they made the error and sent them always to the shortest distance to the bomber. The gaze heuristic tries to keep the angle constant, and that's, according to some historical studies, one of the reasons why the British won the war over Britain. The Germans didn't get the heuristic. They had the better rocket technology, but that didn't help. So a heuristic is a rule that's precisely defined, that gives you a kind of schedule of action, and it can solve problems faster and more safer and more accurate than complex estimations. The heuristic among baseball players is used unconsciously. Most players can't explain what they can know. That's called intuition. So intuition, much of intuition is using rules in the right place. But the same heuristic can be used consciously. And here is a famous example. You may remember the miracle on the Hudson River, where a plane took off in LaGuardia Airport, and after a few minutes, something totally unexpected happened. A flock of Canadian geese collided with the plane. Both engines shut down. It got quiet. We know that there was no panic, but the passengers prayed. And the two pilots, Sullenberger and Skiles, turned around and had to make a decision about life and death. Can I make it to the next airport? How do you make this decision? How do you find out? Now, one idea is they would somehow calculate, estimate the trajectory and see, in order to avoid to hit in too early. But they used now consciously the same heuristic. In that case, you fixate the tower of the airport through the cockpit windshield. And if the tower goes up, you will not make it. You will hit in before. And that's what I did. And here's an example how a simple heuristic helped to save all the passengers, and all of them survived. In the same way, experienced leaders have a so-called adaptive toolbox of heuristics in order to deal with people or with strategy. I'll illustrate here just a few. The common denominator is all of them are quite simple, but they create an atmosphere in a company. For instance, hire well and let them do their job. That is a heuristic that takes care that only good people will enter the company, but then there's trust. Let them do some. For instance, many universities make the error not to spend much time in the hiring committee by hiring new professors, but then controlling them year by year and year by year and with short-term gains. That doesn't necessarily lead to creativity. The Max Planck Society, where I work, makes it the opposite way. There's a long process to find directors internationally, and then there's total freedom. You only need to deliver. A second example is first listen, then speak. That's a rule for the person who is in the superior position, not for the one who is in the inferior position. Lufthansa teaches that rules to their captains. And I just pick another one under strategy. Let's take the last one. Don't buy financial products you don't understand. So if that simple rule would have been followed before the last financial crisis of 2008, on both sides of the Atlantic, the crisis would not have happened as it did. And I've seen, meanwhile, CEOs of large companies changing their minds. For instance, one CEO, she told me, before, when we were listening to someone who presented us a product, and I didn't understand, but the others nodded, I nodded too. Now I've learned my lesson, and my rule is you have 15 minutes time to explain your product in your business plan. If I don't understand it, I won't buy it. That's another simple rule. So let's move on to the general plan. So far we have seen what is a heuristic. A heuristic is a rule that is one of many people have in the adaptive toolbox or institutions have in their toolbox. A heuristic is not what you often hear in behavioral economics, an explanation for an error that people make. And part of our contribution is that we put the heuristics into algorithmic models. It's basically what Herbert Simon called AI, but he meant psychological AI. So the heuristics experts use, and you program them in computers and test them. So we have the concept of the Adaptive Toolbox, that's a research program that's descriptive. So what heuristics are there? What's the building blocks that you can use to combine them in a new one? And what evolved capacities do they exploit? For instance, the gaze heuristic requires that the outfielder can keep the eyes on the ball and also run. That's one of the reasons why robots can't use them very well, but animals can do. A study of heuristics has also a prescriptive or normative question, and that's called the study of ecological rationality. In what types of environments does a given heuristic work and where does it fail? This is a new question because the earlier research on heuristics and biases has always assumed that the heuristic is second best. There is logic or probability gives you the right answer. That's true under risk, but not in the large world of uncertainty. So we ask, can we show the condition where we can expect that using a certain heuristic will work? I'll give you an example in a second. And finally, intuitive design. That means we use the results of the research to help to design procedures and environments that are intuitive in the sense that people can easily use them because they correspond to the heuristics they use anyhow every day. So let's start with the Adaptive Toolbox. I'll give you an example from another heuristic in the class of one reason decision making. So not every heuristic uses just one reason. It's just one of the most interesting classes. So how can you find the one reason that helps you to do better than someone who uses a regression analysis? That's the challenge. So imagine you have a large company and customer bases of hundreds of thousands or millions, and you want to do targeted information, sending catalogs or sending special offers, but you don't want to waste your time on customers who won't buy anymore. So the question is how to predict which of your customers will still buy and those who are inactive, who won't die. What would you do to find it out? Again, there are two ways to think about it. One is, it's a complex problem, we need a complex solution. And just like with the trajectory model, here is an example of a complex solution. That's the so-called Pareto negative binomial distribution model. I'm not going into any math today, but I hope you will be impressed. It has a number of 3 parameters, and it delivers a probability for each of the customers that he or she will buy within the next half year. So, 2 colleagues of mine, both professors of marketing, realized that real managers rarely, if ever, use this model or similar models, but they rely on heuristics. So they went out to find out what heuristics are the managers relying on, and then testing them against the Pareto negative binomial distribution model. Both of them were hoping to show that the complex model will make better predictions of customer behavior than the heuristic the managers are using. So let's first look on what heuristics the managers were using. In 3 companies, the managers were using the same heuristic. It's called hiatus heuristic. And it is, if a customer has not purchased within 9 months, classify as inactive, meaning won't buy anymore, otherwise as active. Again, we have a heuristic that relies on a single data point or a single variable and ignores all the rest. The rest is used by models like Pareto, binomial distribution, and may include the number of purchases, how high they were, the spacing, and whatever you know about these things. So now they put this on test. And so there are 3 companies, and the Pareto negative binomial distribution model was fitted, it has 3 parameters, on the first half of the time, and then made predictions for the other half of the time. The hiatus heuristic has, with a fixed parameter of 9 months, so you could treat this as a free parameter and fit it. They didn't. It has no free parameters, so you don't need any data. You just go on and make your predictions. What was the result? What do you think? On what would you bet? Complexity or simplicity? So here's the result. Let's look first on the airline. So on the y-axis, we have the correct predictions in percentage. So it is binary, so customer will buy or not, so 50% is chains. And that's where we start. The problem is hard. If you just claims, there's not much better than maybe a little bit over 80% possible. So the hiatus heuristic is the white one. It predicts slightly better, 77% correct, than the Pareto negative binomial distribution model for the airline. It does the same for the apparel, and it matches for the CD now. So here we have a case that I call less is more. The complex model, the Pareto negative binomial distribution model, has all the information the heuristic has and more. And also does lots of more estimation. And nevertheless, on average, it is less accurate. And even more, it also needs more effort and more time. That's called a less is more. Now, important is less is more effects. You won't find them in a world of risk where everything is known. So that would mean where the Pareto negative binomial distribution model has not to estimate any parameters. So, or it knows its parameters for certain. It has not to do any estimation. But you will find them in a world of uncertainty. And this is an important insight, that under uncertainty, you should make things simpler. The example also shows that an important methodological principle. So if you would just look at the red bars, and then you might conclude, oh, Pareto negative binomial distribution model does very well. Yeah. But you need to do competitive testing, and not just against other complex models, but against simple models. That's a general principle that's also important for AI. Much of machine learning tests complex models against other complex models, but very rarely is there the insight that you need to test your models against simple models, in particular if you do predictions like here. This is just a demonstration here. Now you could argue these are only 3 companies. There may be something special with the 3. So we did another study where we had 35 companies. Then you could argue maybe the Pareto negative binomial distribution isn't so good after all. And that's justified suspicion. So we tested the best machine learning models against the same hiatus heuristic. And I'll show you the result. Before I show you, what do you think? So we have tested, for instance, random forest. If you don't know what random forest is, doesn't matter. just think about the most complex form of decision trees you can think of, and of many of them. Here is the result. If you look on the left side, this is the same situation, customer purchase predictions. Now it is 35 studies. And what you see is the Pareto negative binomial distribution model, that's red again, is not as good as logistic regression or random forest. It is actually better than another marketing model. But across all these studies, the simple heuristic predicts actual purchases better than any of these models on average. On the right side, we have tested this for a different class of problems. They are all type of repeat problems, like customer repeat purchases. So whether for instance, healthcare, whether a patient that had been in the hospital and has been released will return within 6 months. Or whether a sports team that won a certain prize will win it again. So that's the thing. Yeah? And you can see here's the same pattern across all of that. You do better in prediction on average if you rely on the hiatus heuristic. On the right side, we had to fit the hiatus heuristic to various types of months because 9 months is not a general one. So that leaves us the question. We see again, less is more effects. They should not happen according to standard theory. And rather, people who rely on just one reason run the risk of being accused of having cognitive limitations and making errors, ignoring relevant information. But we see now that that's not the case. There's a reason why people naturally ignore some kind of information. And it's not because they're stupid. Often ignoring helps you to avoid estimation error, for instance. So I'll give you now an answer to the question, how can we prove situations where a simple model that just looks at one reason cannot be beaten by any linear model, such a logistic regression. And I use something simple so that you can see the inside. So assume there are 5 predictors, like recency. And what you see in the green bars, these are the beta weights. So this is the additional contribution of the lower ranked variables to the higher ranked ones. And what you here see, we look at a simple situation where the criteria is binary and where the variables are binary. What you see here, the weight of the first Q is double than that of the second Q, and so it goes on. It's exponentially increasing. And you can easily see that if the first Q will decide whatever will happen. So the condition is, if the weight of the first Q is larger than the weights of all the other Qs, then we find this. Then we can prove situations. In this situation, adding further Qs doesn't help. So you get an intuition of the study of ecological rationality. And I'm not going to mathematics. I just want to get your intuition straight. What you're seeing here is a situation that shows you if that holds, then a heuristic with just one reason cannot be improved by adding any further reasons, say by means of a regression. If the condition does not hold, that may be possible, but we'll get to more of that. Let me summarize these examples by pointing out 3 methodological principles, which I consider essential for good decision-making research, but they are often not followed. So what we need in order to decide about a heuristic, what it is and how good it is, needs formal models, actually algorithmic models of heuristics that tell you what to do, like fixate your gaze, start running and keep the angle constant, or just look at the recency, and so on. These what is not helpful, so we need to improve on the earlier labels like availability or representativeness, where it was never clear what exactly they mean, and you could not really make precise predictions. You could use them after the fact, or even system one, which is another black box of things. So we need to go beyond these concepts. The second thing we need is competitive testing instead of null hypothesis testing. What you have seen, the recency heuristic was tested against machine learning models, against standard marketing models and others. That's the way to proceed, and not to find that your model predicts better than chance, because then you don't know. And under uncertainty, that's the more important. And finally, tests of predictive power, not data fitting. So in the hiatus heuristic case, the models were fitted on the first, say, 40 weeks of data, and then tested on the next 40 weeks of data. That's real prediction. You always win with a highly parameterized model if you just do data fitting. So if you fit your regression weights to your data and then stop and report 87% explained variance. What's need to be done is to fit it on one part and test it on the other part. That's routine in machine learning. It's still not routine in behavioral economics or economics. Most models are fitted. So these are three principles. We need formal models, we need to test them competitively, and we need to test them how well they predict. And under these conditions, we can really evaluate how well they are. Here is a second example for a heuristic, and it addresses the question, how should I invest a certain amount of money into N assets? And so, as you know, Harry Markowitz got his Nobel Prize in economics for the mean variance model, which answers this question. And it's standard probability theory. And again, it's easy to calculate, but the model's problem is in estimating the parameters. So if N increases, then the number of covariances you have to estimate increase exponentially. So that means for large N's, you can count with lots of estimation error. So anyhow, problem solved here. And when Harry Markowitz made his own investment for his own money for the time of his retirement, he used his Nobel Prize winning optimization model. So we might think he did not. He used a simple heuristic that is known as 1/n. It means allocate your money equally to each of the N funds. If you have 2 funds, it's 50-50. If you're third, it's a third, a third, a third. Now you might think, isn't that stupid? And you might think maybe Markowitz has cognitive limitations and can't do the math, but he discovered the method. He didn't follow it. And it may have been a wise decision, because in the real world of finance, where uncertainty is, there is no guarantee that the mean variance model is good. And for instance, in the study that's cited here, de Miguel and his colleagues, they tested mean variance as well as many more modern versions, Bayesian and non-Bayesian, against 1/n. And they followed all the principles. 1 over n is a formal model. It's extremely simple. You can simulate it. They did competitive testing. They tested 1 over n against mean variance analysis. And finally, they on prediction, not on data fitting. So how well it predicts what you will make. And according to standard criteria like Sharpe ratio, 1 over n made more money than mean variance model most of the time. So here we have another situation where a simple heuristic outperforms a complex optimization model. Again, it would never be able to do that in a world where everything is known, where the future is known perfectly. But it is able to do this under uncertainty. That's why the distinction is important. And the key point is now not that a heuristic is better according to some criteria than a complex model or vice versa. The real question and the real challenge is to understand the conditions under which, say, 1 over n will outperform complex models and when it will not. This is the sole interesting question. That's the question of ecological rationality. So you should not go out from this talk and think, oh, heuristics are actually better than complex models. No, you should go out from these talks and ask the question, what conditions help a certain heuristic to be better than, say, any linear model or the mean variance model? That's the real question. That's the question of ecological rationality. Here is a non-mathematical selection of criteria. So if you have to do with a situation of low uncertainty, on the left side, few alternatives, so n equals maybe 2, high amount of data, then go for complex solutions, for optimization, for big data, such as mean variance. If you in a situation with high volatility, high uncertainty, where many alternatives and there's a relatively small amount of data, make it simple. Yeah. And that's the role of heuristic. This is very general, but I've shown you before very precise conditions and the n. And the general study of ecological rationality, I will just illustrate that with a figure that helps you to explain that even if a condition holds, like we have seen before, the exponentially decreasing weights, which explains that simple equals complex, there's more to that, which explains that in how simple can be better than complex. So here is the traditional view about why people use heuristics. I say traditional because it's now being refuted. So that's the so-called accuracy effort trade-off. The argument is, why do people use heuristics? Yeah, because it's easier and they sacrifice some accuracy for effort. That has been the received view. And this view is correct in situations of risk where everything is known, like lotteries or roulette. But it's incorrect in situations of uncertainty. And you just have seen some example. Under the accuracy effort trade-off, no less is more effects can ever happen because you always pay some price for getting simpler. The bias variance trade-off from machine learning helps you to understand the logic of heuristics, namely the total error you make, say in prediction, is not just a function of bias and noise, but it's a function of bias and noise and variance. Variance is a component that's only relevant if you have to make estimations. So the problem is not, as is often said, the human mind has biases and therefore makes errors? No. The problem is the balance between bias and variance. And actually, you need some degree of biases to trade off variance. Now, I'll explain you this without formals in this picture here. So there are two dart players. The one on the left throws the darts very closely together and very near to the bullseye, the red point. Bias is the difference between the bullseye and the average dart. It's very small. This, yeah, but it's substantial. The player has also low variance because the darts are together. It doesn't tremble very much, this player, and the key problem is bias. On the right side, there's a player who throws all over the place, but on average, exactly in the bullseye, but only on average. This player has a bias of 0. So the bias is the difference again between the average dart and the bullseye, but has a large variance. And if you count the rings, you will see the left player does better, although he has a bias. Heuristics that have no free parameter have no variance. So in statistical terms, each of the darts corresponds to a sample drawn from a population, and all the samples are slightly different. And the sample estimates. A heuristic that has no free parameters, has no such error, but it likely has a larger bias than a complex model with many free parameters. But the general illustration gives you the idea. The problem is not simply the bias. The problem is the bias and the trembling hand, the variance. And you need somehow balance the two of these. How do you balance that? Statistical methods know that variance is lower if you have larger sample, but variance is higher if you have more free parameters. So you delete the free parameters, you make fewer estimates in order to decrease variance. That's the key point that illustrates that a simple heuristic, like that one on the left side, can outperform a complex method that suffers from estimation error. The confusion between situations of risk and with an uncertainty is known as the turkey illusion. So that means you have a situation of uncertainty, but you treat it as a situation of risk, known risk. So why turkey? Assume you are a turkey. It is the first day of your life, and a man comes, and you fear he will kill me, but he feeds you. Second day of the life, the man comes again, and you fear he might kill me. No, he feeds you. Third day of your life, same thing. By standard Bayesian updating, the probability that the man feeds you and doesn't kill you goes up every day a bit. On day 100, it is higher than ever before, but it's the day before Thanksgiving and you're dead meat. So the turkey was not in a world of risk where he knew all things that could happen. It was a world with uncertainty. The turkey illusion is probably less often committed by turkeys, but by people. Think about the last financial crisis. Before 2008, the standard estimates of volatility, like the VIX, so the estimated problems of the market went actually down before the crisis and only up in the last moment. And the mathematical models used by standard finance theory are quite similar to the one our Turkey used. It's updating of probabilities. And then you create an illusion of certainty. So the Turkey illusion means that you use optimization methods in situations of uncertainty, and you create illusions of certainty, and surprises will happen. Finally, let me just give you one example of intuitive design. And yeah, neither of these two. I'll take another one. We can talk about that before. I work with the Bank of England on a project called Simple Heuristics for a Safer World of Finance. As you know, the one thing that led to the financial crisis was modern finance theory or modern economic theory. And that's what I just symbolized with the Turkey illusion. The Andy Haldane is the chief economist of the Bank of England. And when Mervyn King brought us together in 2012, I explained him what heuristics are. And my first example was the gaze heuristic, here with how dogs catch frisbees and outfielders fly balls. And then, of course, being an economist, he asked me, yeah, these are wonderful examples, but is there any general theory? And I explained him the ecological rationality, bias variance, and other things. Andy Haldane did not just say, how interesting, and then went back to his desk. He said, I'm going to test that with financial data. And in our next meeting he had with a colleague who ran through lots of data, he had done some analysis, found that complex models predict not as good as simpler models, like simple leverage ratios. And then he said to me, Gerd, you know what I'm doing? I have to give the Jackson Hole talk, and here is my manuscript, and here's my waste paper basket. I will give a different talk. And the talk he gave had the title, The Dog and the Frisbee. And it made a point that under uncertainty, you should look for situations that are simple and robust rather than complex models that are fragile. His talk was a very unusual talk at Jackson Hole. And you can read the talk, and you can read also the skepsis. The Wall Street Journal named it the speech of the year, and it has changed thinking in finance. And I just show you one thing, which is how can one predict that a bank is in trouble? And as you know, there are quite complicated methods like value at risk. You might have to might have to estimate thousands of risk parameters and millions of covariances. So we developed another type of heuristic that's called a fast and frugal tree. And in order to predict vulnerability from data. So a fast and frugal tree is a decision tree that's incomplete, and you can guess why, to reduce estimation error, and has the following property: after each of a small number of questions or variables, a decision is possible. That means the tree, as you see here, has 3 variables and 3 + 1 exits. That's a general property of a fast and frugal tree with binary variables and criteria. So I'm not going into detail. The first question is, what's the leverage ratio? And if it's smaller than a certain number, then immediately red flag. The second one is, in case that's fine, what's the market-based capital ratio? If it's below a certain number, immediately a red flag. Otherwise, third question is asked and makes the distinction. So if you take UBS at the time, immediately before the crisis, it had a leverage ratio lower than that number, it would immediately have gone a red flag, although it passed all the other ones. So a fast and frugal tree has a very interesting property. It is non-compensatory. You can't make trade-offs. So you can't trade a too low leverage ratio against having too much on other things. That's a little bit like the human body. So if your heart fails, it doesn't help you if you have a good liver. See, that's the kind of thinking that's behind that. So let me conclude with this example. I have introduced you into decision-making under uncertainty. And uncertainty is not like risk. You will still read in behavioral economics that people talking about judgment under uncertainty, but it's really risk. And uncertainty is not really dealt with. So risk is not the same as uncertainty. In most situations, we have a little bit of both. The best decision under risk is not the best decision under uncertainty. You have seen a number of examples. Rational decision-making under uncertainty, what's that? Can this be? And the answer is simple heuristics reduce error from overfitting the past. And there are a number of conditions of ecological rationality which we have worked out and which you still need to find out. Are optimization theories like finance theories useful in a world of risk? Yes, if everything is stable, but not in a world of uncertainty. That's the most general. Under uncertainty, optimization is an illusion and a dangerous one. Finally, less is more. Less is more, one is the most interesting effects we can have, where we can do with less effort better, make better predictions than with more effort. Typically, it's a kind of inversely U-shaped curve. So too little is not good, too much is not good, somewhere in the middle. And simple heuristics can actually predict not only faster and with less effort and data, but also more accurate than complex models. So I've invited you to a kind of thinking that could help to really make behavioral economics and behavioral finance into a theory that respects what people do and improves and helps what people do, a theory that takes uncertainty seriously and a theory that takes heuristics seriously. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gerd, for this very stimulating talk. I will answer. I will ask rather a few questions related to this. And given the current circumstance that we live in sort of a special crisis that we're going through, I'd really like to somehow highlight this aspect and in terms of decision making under these kind of conditions. So in your work and partly in your presentation today, basically you highlighted that we people, but mostly modelers actually, who think about how people make decisions, have a strong bias against having a bias, right? So by what you call a bias. Yeah. And this basically what this does is it pushes us to overfit the model, our models to the past data. So it is a well-known critique that the sophisticated, what we call state-of-the-art models actually do very well in describing what happened in the past, but they cannot predict the future. I was that I take it as it is, but I was wondering if you think that heuristic-based models could do somewhat better. I mean, could heuristic decision making somehow, or heuristic models predict the current circumstances that we live in terms of COVID crisis or market crashes, or do they help us actually? Can they help us avoid this turkey illusion?
Yeah, I've given you a few examples where that's the case, yeah? From business and from these things. Applied to pandemics. So I do not know an application of heuristics to the current COVID-19 pandemics, but I myself have tested heuristics models for predicting the flu. So that is, and you may remember Google Flu Trends, which was hailed as the showcase of big data in 2009 when it started to make predictions of the flu-related doctor visits. So that it's a useful thing if you can predict that, because in the US, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control data has a delay of 2 weeks, and Google tried to do it faster. It was termed nowcast. So what's happening now in the next days? Or next week. And here we have the same divide of philosophies. One is, this is a complex problem, a difficult problem. We need a very complex model. That's where the Google engineers went for. They used, so their intuition was, if someone is sick of the flu, the person will likely put in certain search terms in the Google search machine, and we analyze all the search terms and see whether they predict the flu. And they were analyzing some 50 million search terms and millions of models trying through until they had a final algorithm that was kept secret and used some kind and used something like 50 or so variables. And so then the swine flu happened. It was like a small financial crisis in 2009, and it happened in the summer, from March to October, where it's its high point. And that's not what the Google Flu Trends has learned, the secret algorithm. It was calibrated on some 5 years of big data. And it has learned the flu is high in the winter, low in the summer. And now the opposite happened. So it underestimated the flu-related doctor visits. And so many problems came after that, and after some 5 to 7 years, depending on how you count it, of predictions, it was closed down, and many changes. The changes always went in the following direction. So if a complex model doesn't work, what do? You make it more complex. And the Google engineers, they asked themselves, are we too simple? They'll make it more bigger. The alternative is to think about what humans do in situations that are highly volatile. We know from memory research that even memory in this situation discards the information back and tries to rely only on the most recent information. And we built a recency heuristic that predicts the flu-related doctor visits by only one data point, namely the most recent data available. That was a week ago. And the heuristic is just predict that it will be next week like the week before. You can easily see that this heuristic can follow events like the swine flu, can immediately adapt if things change, while big data analytics can't as easily. It has too much data. And we showed over the entire 7 years of predictions that Google Flu Trends used with the same data, that the simple heuristic reduced the error that Google Flu Trends made by about half. So it predicted much better. So this is an illustration of a direct comparison between a big data algorithm and a simple heuristic in cases of influenza. But there is no similar application I've seen yet for COVID-19.
Okay, great. So, as I understand, basically, what you're suggesting is that the heuristics would be much they would adjust to new circumstances. Not necessarily that they would help us predict crisis, but once the crisis hits, they would be much easier adaptable to crisis. So sort of this new ecology. Sort of ecological rationality. So they would very quickly adapt to new ecology because they somehow have a very short memory. They look back not very far, and therefore, as a couple of days pass from the crisis, you basically will have a new mode in terms of your decision making. Yes. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you very much. I'd like to take a bit more evolutionary approach to my next question. So I understand that heuristics might guard us from this false sense of certainty, right? So we are not thinking in terms of risk. We are acknowledging that there are things that can happen that we might not even imagine, right? And so we don't have this false of certainty. But I was wondering, aren't these heuristics also developed based on our previous experience anyway? I mean, I was wondering, like if we take it very literally, do you think Turkey was actually optimizing or following heuristics when it actually thought that when it couldn't anticipate Thanksgiving?
I don't know about turkeys, but it's just that Nassim Taleb has duped it Turkey heuristic, and philosophers before him have used chickens to illustrate that. But I think your question is to the point. So where do these heuristics come from? Do we learn them? And the gaze heuristic you have seen with the baseball outfielder, that's one which we find among fish, among birds, among dogs, among many animals. So it seems to be a heuristic that evolution has reinvented many times, or that has been genetically transmitted, that we don't know. And they are all situations for interception. So you intercept prey, for instance, or a ball, or anything. And also heuristics which then humans use for problems where evolution never thought about, like catching fly balls or sailing. And it's the same thing. So we have the study of where heuristics come from. We have a number of great, a small number of great studies, but there is too little attention to this. And part of the problem is because heuristics play no role in the standard theory of expected utility maximization. And in behavioral economics, they're mostly given the role of the reason, the causes of irrationality. It's both is a misunderstanding. We need to take heuristics seriously. Observe ourselves what we do. Imitation is another great heuristic that children imitate much more precisely and generally than, say, young chimpanzees or any other animal. That's really our strength. And that means that technology that's invented is copied and culture evolves, where what one generation has produced, the next one will build on it. And that's not the case by most animal species who don't imitate. So these are some thoughts about this issue about evolution.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to think now in relation to current circumstances that we live in, but maybe not in such a close past like COVID, but in general about the rise of technologies and rise of information technologies and how this sort of transformation allows us decision makers to have access to very large data sets. Yeah. And of course, I completely agree with you that this this has become some kind of a fetish, and sort of people are using it perhaps too much in order to even accomplish very simple tasks, right? And you were very careful to highlight that there is a very important separation that we have to make, sort of situations under which large data sets and perhaps the model fitting will be performing better, helping us to take better decisions, and in which cases we need to have these heuristics. So I was wondering more from research perspective, if you had any guidances on how should people actually tackle the understanding or sort of study of this dividing line. How do we go about it?
The distinction between risk and uncertainty translates into the world of machine learning and artificial intelligence into one between stable situations where the future is like the past and those who are not stable. So, for instance, Go and chess are stable situations. They are well defined, and also the rules hold tomorrow like yesterday. This is the world where the best known successes of machine learning are. And it is they do best if the past is like the future, and that's also the world where big data helps you most. If you are in an unstable situation like the flu, and the flu is unstable because viruses change in unexpected ways, and in the case of Google flu predictions, users not only search for information because they are sick, because they are for other reasons like being curious, and all this messes up the thing. In these situations, there's a good reason to see what experts do and what heuristics experts use and implement them into AI algorithms. These AI algorithms are now very simple and transparent. They are like the recency heuristic that we tested for Google flu and such things. By the way, the latter approach was the original approach to AI, namely, so Herbert Simon's approach, find out how experts solve a task, code this into an algorithm and program a computer. That was the idea. And Simon believed that that will work for chess. That was wrong. It works for a situation of uncertainty, like humans. It doesn't work as well for a well-defined problem. And that's the place, really, of AI, of big data. And one should be very cautious from claims by marketing. So marketing claims from tech companies who want to convince the police, for instance, that they could predict the likelihood that someone will commit another crime, or the location of crime, or algorithms that are used by courts to predict whether the defendant will commit another crime in the next 2 years. These algorithms, these promises are mainly business promises, and there are a number of studies that have shown that very simple, transparent heuristics do as well and have not any of this mystique that even some churches are taking in by believing if it's a black box algorithm, then it must be good.
Okay, very interesting. So, and the very last question that I have to you, I'd like to play a bit more of a devil's advocate here compared to people who are optimizing. Every time I interact with these people, one argument for optimization that comes up very quickly is the fact that if you optimize, you basically have a one way of acting. We know exactly how you should act because you are optimizing. You are maximizing this very well-defined objective function. And when you think about heuristics, you have basically multiple different heuristics. And of course, during your talk, you offered us the opportunity to basically test them against each other and to select the better one. But at the same time, when we were thinking about ecological rationality and we were thinking about different types of crises and the fact that the also current COVID virus could mutate in many different ways, and therefore we could have a completely unpredictable future. It's not so clear how to do this kind of testing. So I was wondering if we had any further guidelines on how to sort of pit the different heuristics against each other in order to come up with something which would be maybe not foolproof, but the best we could do under current situation.
On your first part of your question, on the first part, to take an optimization solution that is as the right way to act or the only way to act in a situation of uncertainty means that most likely you have a bad solution. You don't want that. I've given you examples. So the second one is, I think we have to bury the dream that all problems have one and the same answer. It's not the case for statistics even. There is no statistical tool that is the single best one. Although there are a few statisticians who believe that, but any statistician has a toolbox of problems. Yeah? So in the same way, our body has not one organ, but several, and there's a reason. It has to do with robustness, and often copies of the same organ. So it is, there is no science I know, except this part of economics, who believes that there is one mechanism for everything, not even physics. And in physics, the dream exists, but there is to get, say, quantum theory together with relativity theory, but it's not, has happened. And biology is certainly not. So we need to think about an adaptive toolbox. And I've heard these type of arguments again and again. My reaction is, I regret that smart people are not willing to address the real world and build their own worlds of certainty, assume everything is known, and then you maximize something there. And the problem is that in reality then, reality is taken and reduced to a situation of risk, a lottery, typically. And then you land in a financial crisis, blindly sailing into it and such. On the question how to decide between different heuristics, so the most empirical way is just test them. The second one is go by ecological rationality. And then you have some kind of guidance. So if you're in a world and make predictions where there are powerful predictors and the others are not, or the predictors are highly correlated, then you get to a situation that I showed you with these green bars, where you then can bet, okay, then let's do something that is just find the crucial cue. Or if that's not the case, then do a decision tree like the fast and frugal tree with 3 important variables. And that's done, for instance, the tree with the Bank of England. how we did it. We did it by having the experts from the bank that were economists who didn't know about fast and frugal trees. We taught them the structure and the reason for it. And they, based on their expertise, they named the criteria from there on. So it's a mixture. And then we estimated the thresholds from empirical data. So it's a mixture between a certain knowledge about a structure, expert knowledge, and then empirical analysis.
Yes, machine learning is definitely ahead of economics in that respect, also because they also have this human in the loop systems kind of things. It's very interesting. Thank you very much for your talk, and thank you for this discussion. We are very happy to have had you here.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Gerd, for intervening, and there was a very interesting talk, as Zach said. Unfortunately, I don't really think we have time for Q&A right now.
No problem.
But really, I think the interview by Zach was comprehensive and very interesting, and more or less tackled all the questions we had. So we would like to thank you again, Gerd, and we wish to everyone a good evening.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so on Zach, is Zach still here?
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
Yes, I am.
There is in a week, a book will come out on machine learning and fast and frugal heuristics. You might be interested. It's MIT Press, and the title is Classification in the Wild. And I have written this with 3 of my machine learning people. The first author has a Greek name, Katsikopoulos.
Okay.
MIT Press. Classification in the Wild, and you might be interested on that.
Thank you very much. Definitely, I'm going to definitely get a copy as soon as it's out. Thank you.
So it was a pity that we couldn't meet in person, but
it indeed was.
It inspires you for your own teaching and research.
Absolutely.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.